You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. I don't know if you've noticed this before, Ed. In all the years when we were doing terrestrial radio back in the 90s, when it was fun to do it, and then during the time that you've been with me here on Sox in the Basement, sitting here doing the podcast for fans, by fans, quickly approaching our 500th episode here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar.
Even the podcast we don't speak of anymore that we did for 10 years before this one?
No, we definitely don't speak of that in any way. But throughout that entire thing, I think you would say I'm kind of a perfectionist. Like, I hate when something goes wrong on my show.
Yes, to the point where you preemptively tell people when I am producing the show at times, just so nobody thinks that you screwed up, anticipating that I'm not going to do it as well as you do it. Even though I was literally your producer and was the guy that produced everything back in the day.
Right. So in short, I'm kind of an ass when it comes to it. So here's what happens on the last show. I totally screw up. And it's driving me nuts. It's been eating me up ever since the show that came out. And if you didn't hear the show last week, you're not going to find the mistake, because I've gone back and fixed it twice, because that's how I am. First, what happened is I wrote down all of my notes before the show as to what I wanted to hit on, and somehow screwed up Bob Nightingale and John Heyman. So the first 100 people that listened between 1 o'clock in the morning and about 6 a.m., because most people, luckily I was up early. I'm sitting on the toilet, I'm flipping through my phone, and all of a sudden I think to myself, wait a minute, did I say Bob Nightingale said that on the score instead of John Heyman? And I'm running downstairs and re-recording a sentence so I can fix it for everybody else, and then waiting for it to be...
toilet paper on your foot and the whole 9 yards.
Oh yeah, and waiting for it to be distributed, and then I'm just miserable. I can't go back to bed. My day has started earlier than I wanted to. I'm aggravated. I'm walking around. I'm just ticked off that I screwed up the beginning of the show. It just annoys me. We're going to get thousands and thousands of downloads off of that. And the first 100 people heard it, and I'm angry about it, right? So now, as the day goes on, I have to go teach a class on podcasting. Think about how ridiculous this is. I'm at the Evergreen Park Library doing a free class. There's like 25 people in the room, and they're there like at different levels of podcasting, and they came to see me talk about how to do a podcast, how I do what I do, give them kind of a tutorial, answer their questions. It was a fun class, and halfway through it, I bring up that episode specifically in my editor that I had brought there so I could put it up on the big screen. And I go, listen to this, how you could do this with things on different tracks. And as I'm playing it, I realize right there in front of this entire class where I'm pretending I'm an expert in podcasting, I realize that when I moved and changed the very beginning to fix the name that I had screwed up, I didn't move the music. So now the next 1,000 people that listen to the show, and a lot of you out there listen to this, you heard me stop talking, and there was like 5 seconds of deadness, and then the song started. Because I screwed that up too, Ed. So I should be professional enough to just pretend that it didn't happen, but it has literally made my skin crawl for the last 3 days. And I did it in front of a class. I'm sitting there trying to act like I'm an expert, and I was an idiot.
What you're saying is it would not be representative of you to be wearing an Accountability Zero shirt from the Sox in the Basement store, because you are taking full accountability for these momentary lapses in technical skill that probably most people just blew off and were like,
Exactly.
And moved on with their lives.
Exactly. I'm not sitting around right now telling you, as Rick Hahn is telling you, that there's all kinds of people that think that I'm very talented, so don't worry about my mistakes. Like he keeps talking about like all these other people around the league. I mean, everybody agrees. Look at all this talent on this team. It's not talent. That's not your issue. You have talent. Guess what? All the other Major League Baseball teams have talent too. They all have a guy that's really good like Luis Robert Jr. They all have a guy that's up and coming. They all have a guy that can throw really well and just has a few kinks that he needs to work out. There's plenty of talent across Major League Baseball. The thing you're not good at is consistency. teaching a system in which everybody who comes up is ready for the way that your manager wants them to perform and how the team expects them to play the game because it's taught at a systematic level, and you don't have any depth and you can't handle injuries. And then you have to rush guys back from injury, so they're rehabbing while they're on the fly at the major league level, which adds the more injury. You can't give rest to people. And this cascade is why you're basically a 500 team. You were a 500 team last year, and you've been a 500 team this year with the exception of your start. Like, if you go back 20 games, they're basically at 500. If you go back 30 games, they're basically about 500. With the exception of the bad start, they're a 500 baseball team. They're just worse than 500 this year because they had the bad start. There's never a point where they go on a run and they go 15-5. That's never going to happen, it feels like, because it hasn't happened in years now with this team. And one of the big reasons is every injury, you have no depth. And because of that, you can't get on a roll because injuries happen, problems happen in a team, and you're not able to overcome them.
Well, and there's two developments that are kind of going on right now that sort of show your point, right? Mike Clevenger went on the DL. Lance Lynn goes on the bereavement list, okay, but he doesn't miss a start, so we're good there. But Clevenger's out, so you're trying to fill in from the minors, and you're basically going to have to do bullpen days. You don't have a starting pitcher that's ready to come up. And in the meantime, very quietly, Michael Kopech had started to turn things around, right? And he's doing better, and he's getting in a little bit deeper into the game.
Second best pitcher on the staff. If you look at his overall,
second best pitcher on the staff.
If you look at most of his numbers, a lot of his metrics have him like second best. I think he's got the second best WHIP on the staff. I think he's got the second best ERA right now on the staff. Like he's actually been so good when you look at how bad he started. That's how good he's been to get to that overall number, to those overall numbers at this point.
But what's been going on is, in the month of June, he started out going 7 innings against Detroit, throwing 92 pitches. He needed 100 pitches to get through 5 innings against Miami. He needed 102 pitches and only went 4 1/3 against Seattle. And he gets pulled after 86 pitches. By his own admission, he doesn't have it against the Rangers. And he only goes 4 innings. He's starting to not be able to get deeper into games. He's starting to not be able to close out and get, and do these things. Some of this is a guy who pitched 119 innings only last year he's going to hit a wall at some point. He's going to hit a dead arm period. He's going to have something go on where he's going to start losing a little bit of it again, and he's going to backslide a little bit. It happens to every pitcher every year. It's okay. It's not a panic bell, but you don't have the ability to sit there and say, hey, Michael, we're going to skip you a start here or there, and we're going to maybe go to a 6-man rotation to give you some rest. They got to rely on him to suddenly become almost a 200-inning guy this year because they don't have any depth. Meanwhile, Jimmy Lambert, if he's the odd man out in the bullpen, because you've got Touki Toussaint, we could talk about him, but if Jimmy Lambert ends up going down to Charlotte with Lance Lynn coming back, you wonder if Jimmy Lambert is losing his spot in the bullpen because they're going to go down there and send him down there and try and stretch him out to start again on the hopes that he can be a 4 or 5 inning guy and be brought back up in case of emergency, because you just don't really have much going on down there. Your best pitcher at Charlotte remains Nate Fisher, who's pretty unproven, and you keep relying on Jesse Schultens to come up, but then you're using him in bullpen situations. He's not a starter. So the talent, you're right. On the surface, the 26-man roster talent, there's a lot of it there. The hubris of thinking that talent is all you need to run a successful baseball team and have a successful run on the field is what's holding this team to 500, and the inability to sit there and say, we need more than 40 guys to make this happen, because you need more than your 40-man roster to really be a successful franchise and have a successful team and have a successful season. No gots for the White Sox.
Yeah, you want to talk about Touki Toussaint. I saw an interesting thing that guys in their debut with the White Sox with the most innings that they didn't give up a hit. And it was Wilson Alvarez who throws a no-hitter. I remember watching that as a youngster. And it was his first time he ever pitched for the Sox. And then it was Touki with 4 innings. His first start, he went 4 innings, or his first appearance, he goes 4 innings, and he doesn't give up a hit. And you sit there and you say, oh, who's this guy? Who is this guy? I'll tell you who he is. He's a guy I've been chasing in fantasy baseball for years, where I see him and he's keeping guys off base. He's got a low whip. He's got a pretty good ERA. He's got really good metrics, and he goes on a run for about 3-4 weeks as a starter, and you're like, oh, he's going to be awesome, and then he completely falls apart. And then he goes to a different team, and he does the exact same thing. Then he completely falls apart. And then he ends up down in the minors, and then he gets used as like a relief pitcher. And that's why he's in the bullpen. And hopefully he's an effective reliever. It'd be nice to see him finally figure out that role. But please, stop printing up the Tuki Toussaint t-shirts and memorabilia so quickly. It was a really nice 4-inning appearance. But let's not start thinking that Rick Hahn, the scouting department, figured something out suddenly, because the track record doesn't suggest it.
Not for a guy who's on his 4th franchise.
No! Ed, you and every listener here to Sox in the Basement, whenever you come along a need for exterior windows, doors, patio doors, storm doors, no high-pressure sales, you are in the showroom at Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. Instead of having somebody come out and sit in your house and ask for something to drink and put their feet up and carrying these dingy, dirty, tiny window samples that have been God knows where, and then you're supposed to imagine what it looks like in their house. And then they sit there and they tell you, here's the deal, but that deal changes the moment I walk out the door. That does not happen at Window and Door Superstore at Oak Forest. Instead, what you do is you show up, the owner's in the showroom, great staff there, all the window etchings are there, full designs, full-size display, all the doors, all the extras. You get to take a look at everything the way it's going to be, and then when you're ready, you buy. And then the owner's on site with their own workers. They're not farming it out. They're going to make sure you get a perfect fit. They're going to custom design everything for you. It's a half block east of 159th and Ridgeland. They've been doing it like this for 40 years in Oak Forest since 1985. See them at 6280 159th Street. For more information, check out windowdooroakforest.com. Let's get to the Sox Nerd, shall we?
All right, Chris, here comes the big bad Boston Red Sox. And I must say, there is a little extra buzz around the ball yard when the Red Sox come to town. The fact that Boston traditionally travels well certainly adds to the atmosphere. The White Sox, as I like to call them, have won the season series the last 2 years from Boston, and that hasn't happened in 7 seasons. The last time the White Sox won 3 straight season series from the Red Sox was when they won 4 in a row from 1962 to 1965, in an era when the teams played each other 18 times a year. If you're looking for a pick to click this weekend, how about Luis Robert Jr.? Good old number 88 has flashed 366, 395, and 561 with 9 RBI in 10 games against the Red Sox. I really hope Tim Anderson is back for the weekend. He destroyed the Red Sox last year, hitting 476, which was the Sox best output against Boston since Paul Konerko hit 478 in 2012. It'd be nice if Lance Lynn got a start this weekend as well. The big guy is 2-1 with a 2.05 ERA in 8 games against the Red Sox. Who should you stay away from? How about Gavin Sheets, who is the worst hitter in White Sox history against Boston? Sheets has the most White Sox at-bats against Boston. That's 18 without a hit. It may be hard to stay away from Sheets on the final day of the series, though. For some bizarre reason, Sheets plays great on Sundays, hitting 367 with 2 homers and 5 RBI on the day. On every other day, Sheets is batting a paltry 206. It may not be a bad idea to skip Dylan Cease in the series. The right-hander is 0-1 with a 9.98 ERA in 4 starts against Boston. With the exception of 2020, the Soxes have been playing every year since 1901. So there's a lot of history between these charter members of the American League. Babe Ruth hit the first of his Sox opponent record 98 home runs for the Red Sox on July 12, 1919 at Comiskey Park. Speaking of Ruth, he was the final out when the White Sox clinched the pennant with a win against the Red Sox on September 21, 1917. But the Sox game against the Red Sox that sticks out in my memory came 17 years ago. On July 9, 2006, the Sox needed 19 innings to trim Boston 6-5 at then-named U.S. Cellular Field. The only thing that was more interesting than the drama that was building that day was Ed Farmer giving play-by-play of his flight cancellations as the last game before the All-Star break wore on. When Tadahito Iguchi drove in the winning run, 6 hours and 19 minutes into the game, I swear Farmer was halfway to Midway Airport by the time Alex Cintron crossed the plate. Now for my zinger. Carlton Fisk is the all-time leader among those who wore only white and Red Sox with 376 home runs. The player who is second all-time in homers among those who played exclusively with the Sox in Sox is Yoan Moncada with 85 home runs. That's it, Chris. That's probably more than you ever wanted to know about the two Sox.
And that's probably the only time you're ever going to hear a statistic where Yoan Moncada and Carlton Fisk are in the same breath.
That's the beauty of the Sox Nerd.
I find it interesting. We're going to see Boston, and you're bringing up the idea that you may need extra pitching, right? Like right. Look at what's going on with Michael Kopech. They're basically using a 6-man rotation right now. And they're 2 out of the wild card, even though they're last place in the American League East because of how crazy things are. You know, we're in the division that at this moment, as we're talking, doesn't even have a team that's above 500 in it. And a team like the White Sox is still only 5.5 games out, which is ridiculous. But you look at the East, everybody's in playoff contention because of the wild card setup. And they've had to, with some of their pitchers, especially like you got a guy like James Paxton. He's only going 1 every 6. He's not going 1 every 5. It's not a 5-man. It's a 6-man really out there. And they're able to do it. Why? Depth. They have depth, Ed. It's going to be on display when you play them now.
Yeah, well, the Red Sox, they lost one of their starters just now. Tanner Houck got whacked in the face by a line drive, so he's on the IL. And they immediately had a guy they were working out of their bullpen, starting into their starting rotation, a guy named Cutter Crawford, who, yes, does throw a cutter. And he's been slowly working into the rotation. They had Paxton, who they took a flyer on. You know, he's been out of the league for how many years with injuries? They're still holding on to guys like Nick Pivetta, who'd been a starter for them last year. They have depth. They just have guys. And they have the ability to bring somebody up and bring somebody along. Meanwhile, the White Sox are sitting here. And again, one of the problems is not talent. But you can't expect Aaron Bummer to go multiple innings. You can't expect Garrett Crochet right now to be stretched out to go 4 or 5 innings when he's just coming back from Tommy John surgery. And you've turned Ronaldo Lopez from a swingman into a high leverage guy. Kendall Graveman's a high leverage guy. Joe Kelly's a high leverage guy. You know, Gregory Santos is not a multiple inning guy. You just don't have 2 or 3 guys that you can sit there and go, if we needed to go and have a couple guys jump from the bullpen and go up and say, okay, you're going to give us 4 innings just to start a game, or you're going to be a bulk reliever following somebody. They can't do that. And Tampa does that. Tampa's been known to do that all the time. Baltimore has pitchers coming out of their ears. They just seem to have more than enough pitching. The Yankees, who don't have enough pitching, seem to have enough pitching. The Blue Jays, I don't know where they're getting all their pitching from, because their best pitcher is down in Arizona, in the Arizona League, trying to remember how to throw fastballs.
He's got the pitching yips, that guy. Alex Manoah basically just like, hey guys, over the winter, I forgot how to pitch.
I forgot how to do everything.
I don't know what happened. I think I bumped my head at some point while I was on vacation, but I just can't figure out how to do this. Oh, man, well, we're going to have to figure something out. Guess what? They're over 500, and they're in the playoff race, and they're doing a lot better than this team. Okay, listen, I look at the depth, and I look at what's come up over the last couple of days, and I can't help but think about the Pedro Grifol comments on Zach Remillard and Jose Rodriguez. Because if you listen to anybody that covers the minors for the White Sox, and we've had several of them on before, James Fox comes to mind right off the top of my head from Future Sox, and they keep telling me, Jose Rodriguez, this guy comes up here, this is an everyday kind of player, you want to see what he can do, he could be somebody who plays on this team, he's definitely a major leaguer, and then he gets up here and he's not going to get to start any games. Pedro was asked about it, he goes, no, I'm going to give all those starts to Zach. Zach Remillard has 5 hits. And his manager is in love with him to the point where that's the only guy he'll consider to get those starts. And his manager loves him so much, he said it out loud that he's not going to give starts to the other guy. He's going to give them all to Zach Remillard. Does that shock you?
What, that the White Sox, first of all, would take until he's 29 years old to bring Zach Remillard up to the major leagues?
No, doesn't shock me.
No, or that the more highly touted prospect is going to sit on the bench and not get a chance to show anything for a team that's under 500 and could use a boost to their offense and their defense anywhere they could find it.
No, that's par for the course with this organization.
Yeah, that doesn't shock me. Or the fact that they've already moved on from Lennon Sosa, that he's not even the guy up here anymore.
Right.
I mean, Zach Remillard, I gave him some love coming out of spring training. He had a good spring training, and I said, look, if you're looking for a guy who can play all over the field and you want to have a utility guy in your bench, Remillard has done that in the minors, played pretty well all over the field, infield, outfield, whatever, had a good spring. I don't think he's an untalented guy, but he's not. He's a little like Romy Gonzalez. He's not really ever been a prospect per se. He's a minor league guy that probably has enough talent to do something in the majors, but will not be a star in all likelihood, unless he's discovered something amazing in the meantime here, in which case, good for you, Zach Remillard, and good for the White Sox for letting you go in the offseason. It hasn't happened yet, but we know what's going to happen. So, in fact, you know what we should really do is we really should give out the Staff of Cork and Kerry right now.
Who are you giving it to?
Well, I mean, Luis Robert over the past, now we haven't given out in some time. Luis Robert over that time period has an OPS of 1,009, slugging percentage of 647 on a 275 average.
That's good. Really That's very good.
He's clearly the best player on the team. Quietly, Yasmani Grandal, maybe not so quietly, actually doing pretty well too. A 289 average, 703 OPS is pretty respectable. He's doing his job. You got a bunch of other guys kind of scuffling along there. Benintendi's doing okay. I know he's been a past winner. Jake Berger's on a cold streak. As much as I'd love to give it to him. But you know what? Based on what Pedro has said and the anointing of Zach Remillard as this team's offensive savior, I guess he gets the Staff of Cork and Kerry this week. He's got a 294 average. He is doing well in that regard. He has not struck out a whole bunch.
Hold on a second. He's got a 294 slugging percentage, too. He's like Nick Madrigal, but not as good. At least in this small sample size. He's getting the Staff of Cork and Kerry.
He might be smarter on the base pass than Nick
You know
Madrigal.
what? He might be. And I don't want to put the guy down. I just think it's crazy for the manager to just basically say, this is my guy and this isn't my guy after only a couple of games with one guy and not even getting a look at the other guy. But then again,
and that's ridiculous.
Absolutely par for the course. It's completely expected.
But look, in terms of Zach Remillard being a worthy holder of the Staff of Cork and Kerry, honestly, a minor league journeyman who comes up and, gets a bunch of hits and is hitting 294 and gets some playing time, this might be his moment in the sun. So let him have the staff too. I mean, just for nothing else, good for you for sticking with it and getting up here, pal.
All hail Zach Remillard, the holder of the mighty Staff of Cork and Kerry. Cork and Kerry is the proud sponsor of the podcast for fans, by fans, Sox in the Basement, 33rd and Princeton, shadow of the ballpark. They're your home base for White Sox pregame, postgame. Get the kids over there beforehand, get them fed afterwards, have a drink, commiserate, or celebrate with White Sox fans. Learn more at corkandkerry.com. Sox in the Basement listeners, do the hard work. And if you're a hardworking man or woman on the South Side, you need to be outfitted properly. And that's why you should visit Red Wing Shoes in Evergreen Park, New Lenox, and Geneva. A work boots specialty store that carries sizes from 6 to 16 and feet as wide as 4E. A 115-year-old company that came out of Red Wing, Minnesota, and one of its largest stores in the entire Midwest is in Evergreen Park, Illinois, ever since 1976. When you're on your feet, the footwear is everything. So why not get an expert fitting? They warranty, repair, and offer free conditioning with laces. And they also carry Carhartt work clothing as well. Located at 3347 West 95th Street in Evergreen Park, Illinois, at 208 East Maple Street on Route 30 in New Lenox, or at 1749 South Randall Road in Geneva. Visit them today. You work hard. You've earned it. Red Wing Shoes. All right, so I don't think Zach Remillard is good enough to be in the All-Star consideration. I'm pretty confident in that. Luis Robert,
I would say not.
No. Luis Robert Jr., who you mentioned, is definitely in it. In fact, at this moment, I believe he's a shoo-in. He's not going to get the fan voting, but if he's not on the roster, it would be just an absolute travesty. Okay. I was going through some of his stats here, and I was just kind of curious, like, where is everybody sitting when we're looking at the All-Star game? Like, who's going to be the White Sox rep? Who can I realistically say probably an All-Star? He's third in the American League right now in home runs. He should be in the home run derby if he wants to go be in it. He's ninth overall in the American League in OPS. He's an outstanding defensive player. You can't even question that. And when you compare him against actual outfielders, because Shohei and Yordan Alvarez are really DHs. If you compare him against actual outfielders, only Arozarena and Yoshida, I think that's it, and Austin Hayes, those three are the only three that have a higher OPS than Luis Robert Jr. So, I mean, like, that's the guy. That's who I'm expecting to be in the All-Star game. I had somebody tweet at me after the last episode with Ashlyn Berger, talking about her efforts to get her husband Jake Berger into the All-Star game. Cute story, but he's not an All-Star. Well, at the time that the tweet was made, he was 10th in the American League in OPS. Right now he's 13th because, as you said, he's kind of on a cold streak. But he's still in the picture there. And when you take a look at what he's doing in terms of home runs, he doesn't even have the official qualifying at bats because of the way the White Sox have used him. He's only got 187, where a lot of the other guys on the list around him are at about 250. And in 187 at bats, he's got 16 home runs, and that places him 6th right now in the American League. So when I look at it, I don't think he's home run derby eligible, or a lot of guys would have to turn it down because you're going to use American League and National League. He's not even in the top 10 there. Okay. But in the American League, he's got the right numbers where you could make an argument, at least a guy that comes in like at the end for like an injury replacement or something like that. When I look at pitchers though, Ed, I can't find anybody. The closest thing is Lucas Giolito. He's nowhere near the top 10 in any major categories. You can't even make an argument. He doesn't have the wins. He doesn't have the ERA. He doesn't have the walks and hits per innings pitched. He doesn't have a lot, and very many metrics at all that come close or get him anywhere close to the top 10 pitchers in the American League. So, I mean, I would think the only arm you could possibly see is, let's say, Liam Hendricks is healthy and they want to bring him in because it's a great story. But in terms of pitchers, I don't see it. So it's really Luis Robert Jr., and then you should be rooting for that second guy getting in. Most likely, the best chance, I would say, of being the second guy getting in is Jake Berger.
Well, I mean, based on that, when you're talking about ranking against other American League players, and that's what the All-Star game is, yeah, he's... How can you argue against him other than the fact that he's basically been used as a part-time player? Okay, you could sit there and say, well, what about, say, Dylan Cease, who is still top 10 in strikeouts, but he has a 4.22 ERA. He's really not doing well, and Lance Lynn's ahead of him in strikeouts, and his 6.51 ERA is not going to make him an all-star. You don't have anybody on the staff that's really standing out. I could see Michael Kopech, honestly, being in the conversation.
Yeah, but he's got 3 wins.
I
know win is a stupid stat, but they're not going to put a guy in that's got an under 500 record and is fringy at best.
And an ERA over 4.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if you're talking about guys turning it down and somebody making an appearance that comes to the, a bunch of these pitchers aren't going to get involved in the All-Star game because they appreciate the nomination, but they don't want to actually appear. Kopech is a guy that maybe falls down on that list.
Well, I think Giolito has got the best out of all of them, but he's outside the top 10.
But I think Giolito has the inside track.
He's probably got the inside track.
They're right next to each other in almost every stat. Giolito's just a little bit better.
I think wins is a stupid stat when it comes to starting pitchers because it's all relative, right? Like, I enjoy a guy who can go out and get 20 wins. Don't get me wrong. You figure out who's a really good pitcher when they're on a bad team. Not because of their win-loss record. You look at how many guys they put on base, how many runs they're giving up, what their fielding independent pitching are. All those things are far more important. But, you've got McClanahan for Tampa Bay with 11 wins, and Eovaldi's got 9, and Cole's got 8. And you got Zach Eflin with 8. He's 8-3. Kyle Gibson's 8-4. Dean Kremer, is it Kremer with Baltimore? I mean, he's so new, I don't even know how to pronounce his name. I'm going to go with Kremer. Even though, phonetically, you would say Creamer, because there's only one M in there. But I'm going to go with Kremer. I'm guessing that's how they say it. 8-3, okay? You got a lot of guys in here with ERAs that are below 3. You got a lot of guys with whips that are sitting at 1.10 and below. You got a lot of guys with really good fielding independent pitching numbers. And you have this whole group that's sitting up there, and they're well above the best White Sox pitcher. So I think you look at Luis Robert Jr., you can make a slam dunk case. This guy's an all-star, right? So his He deserves to be there. He's not on there just because the Sox have to send a representative. He's an all-star. I don't know if you're getting anything else on the team. And if you are, I would say you got a better chance with the guy who's got almost 100 less at-bats than him and only 2 less home runs in Jake Burger. That's the closest thing you have, is what I'm saying, as a guy that if you're trying to root for a second guy to get in. Now, I know there's a lot of fans out there right now who are like, who cares? Stick a fork in the season. I love the comments. Do you ever look at this on social media?
Yeah.
There are people who are hate watching this team. And look, I get aggravated with the team, and I want them to clean house. I saw a thing online the other day where I was asked, where the question put out to everybody was, do you want this team to still win the division? And my answer was yes. I would love for them to win the division. I would love to see something improbable where they end up a game over 500 and win in the worst division race ever in the history of Major League Baseball, right? And then they get destroyed probably in the playoffs. But I would love to see them win it. Life is short. Go win it. But if they're not going to win it, I would love to see them lose by a lot. Because if you're not going to get into the postseason, lose by a lot. So finally something happens up there in that front office and there's a bloodletting. That's how I feel as a fan while I'm watching the thing. But I can still sit there and watch it and appreciate some of the players that are in it. There's a lot of people, no matter what you ask them, are like, I don't care. Hate this team. Hate everything about it. Not watching them anymore. I think I'll start watching the Cubs. I'm so sick of reading this stuff. Honestly, we get it. You're angry. Unfortunately, they're not going to let the fan base take a vote, and that's going to determine what Jerry does. Because Jerry doesn't care about any of you. He never has. So it doesn't matter how aggravated you are. So, I just don't get that. Do me a favor, everybody. Just stop picking on your fellow White Sox fans out there. Because I do this. I scroll for about 20, 30 minutes a day. I get bored with what I'm doing. I start looking through all the different postings and all these different Facebook pages and stuff like that. Look, it ain't the guy's fault who's excited about something that happened with the team that you're mad at Jerry Reinsdorf. Give the fan a break. Now, again, if he's a fan that gets in there and tells you that Jerry's great and Rick Hahn's doing a wonderful job, have at it. Tear him apart.
Well, and for things like the Jake Burger debate that we're having here about whether or not he's somebody that merits potential all-star, it's your opinion, it's my opinion that he does. Okay, so we agree that a guy who's got 16 homers and almost 100 less at-bats than anybody else around him in the top 10 of home runs in the American League, other than Aaron Judge, who, by the way, his official at-bats are deflated by how many walks he has, and he's been injured as well. We're sitting here saying one of the good things that as Sox fans we should all be able to agree on is the story of Jake Burger, okay? This guy who is not necessarily a front office favorite, this guy who has fought his way onto the team, this guy who has provided some highlights with the 16 home runs, this guy who, if he had been playing every day, if he had enough qualifying at bats, by the way, his 832 OPS would be in the top 15, and his 551 slugging on the year would have him third in the American League, but he doesn't have the sufficient number of at bats to qualify for those. We're just saying, hey, he's wearing a White Sox uniform. Let's rally around Jake Burger because he represents something good on the season, even if the season itself is lost, even if the season itself really should be, like you said, end in a bloodletting of the front office. And it should, instead of going from a mild disaster, it should go to Hindenburg levels of disaster. Jake Burger is the humanity there, right? So why not get along with your fellow White Sox fans and just sit there and say, hey, look, there's a couple of good things going on here. Luis Robert Jr. is a really good baseball player, and he's a guy that we can be fans of.
He's the best baseball player on the team. He's the best baseball player on the team.
Objectively, he's good at his job.
Right, he's the best baseball player on the team. He's maddening with his streakiness. But the clear-cut best baseball player on the team is Luis Robert Jr. If you don't believe that, it's because you just have a favorite because he's your favorite for some other reason. But if we're going to talk about the best, if you told me you get one player off the team and you could start your team, and trust me, I will be outdrawing the White Sox by halfway through the first season. It'll be over because I could assemble a staff of college interns to do most of the stuff that this team does wrong better than what this team does. Okay, and the Chicago
Lanutis are going to be the better team.
Exactly, and I would take the Chicago Lanutis and Luis Robert Jr. and I would just walk out the door because it would be a no-brainer. I wouldn't even have to think about it. I'd be like, that's the guy. I'm taking him with me. Now you can't. I don't think that he has all the best qualities. There are some times where he kind of aggravates me, but you know what? Overall, you cannot deny how good he is. And he's the best player on the White Sox. And he should be an all-star. If he's not an all-star, it's an absolute travesty. He's an all-star. So, I mean, like, that's your best guy right now in Chicago.
And as fans, we should, Sox fans, we should be rooting for him to get better. We should be rooting for him to do things and just in awe of the things that he does. And where you would take him to start your own franchise, I'm just shocked given the things that have gone on this week that Zach Remillard's not even in your conversation.
I'll get him when the White Sox waive him in 3 weeks.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found and always on soxinthebasement.com.